crop circles. We're going to turn off our cell phones. S'il vous plaît. Oh, that's such a terrible music. It's terrible.
Yes, we're being serenaded from outside.
It's kind of a... Oh, tell them not to use that door. I don't want to listen to that terrible rap music or whatever it is. That door right there, there's a man right there who's going in and out of this door between these two rooms. And is this that we're expecting?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Can I ask this question, sir?
Yeah.
If a late person comes, do you have a rule about not opening the door for the next hour?
No, they can just come in quietly, and we'll make space for them.
That'll be okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we need a chair for each of our staff people. It's Lisa and for Raven. So there's this chair here for...
If they get a chair, if they can't squeeze in, can they...
There's a chair here and a chair here and a... Is someone taking that chair?
This guy just went to the bathroom.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, we'll just, I mean, it can expand that way some. It's fine.
Okay, very good. Okay, have a great time, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
T minus 15 minutes and counting. I'm the only doctor you'll ever meet that's on time, because in emergency medicine, 5 minutes is your life. So I'm never late. It drives everyone crazy because I'm very punctual. Thank you for coming and being here. And I'm going to proceed as if everyone was here for the lecture and workshop yesterday, so we don't have to retrace 3 hours of information. If you weren't here, I apologize for that, but I think since most people were, that it would be better for us to be able to just move forward. Anyone who wasn't here yesterday? A few, 2 or 3. Have any of you folks read the book?
Yes.
Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, or Disclosure? Then that will help you. This is an intensive. We're going to cover in a compressed way in 3 hours what we do in a week in one of our expeditions. And we are going to first start with a welcome. And I'd like to acknowledge some folks who've been here helping me. Linda Willits, who has been with me for 11 years, helping all over the world. And without her, I wouldn't be here because I couldn't be. So thank you, Linda. God bless you. And also people who are helping out here. Dan, you raise your hand. And Lisa Scooten. And Jeff. And someone who's coming in a few minutes, Raven, who you may have seen yesterday, who lives in OC, Orange County. So those folks really appreciate their help, and thank you very much. And I'm sort of dressed casually. It's Casual Monday. Who needs Casual Friday? Because we're going to be doing some meditation and some practices today. And the purpose of this intensive is to first start out in a Socratic method, which is I will go where you ask me to go. So what you didn't have your questions answered, or you have things in your intellect that need to know, it's completely wide open for this first section, because that's, I find, helps people with what they need to know and what they're curious about, so that when we get to the meditation part in the last hour, they can really be there. Does that make sense? So that's how we'll proceed. And the points I want to cover during this particular intensive is the basis of the CE5 initiative, how we make contact and the kinds of experiences we have, and a discussion then of the cosmology and consciousness, and how the material and celestial cosmos is interfacing with each other, and how that explains a lot of the so-called phenomena that people see, and why it is, how is it that a 800-foot diameter on each side triangular ET spacecraft can be hovering over a steeple in Henri-Chapelle. In Belgium, I was there, and as the gendarme and the Air Force in Belgium reported, collapsed into a pulsating basketball-size orb of orange-red light and then vanish straight up into space in the clear sky. How does that happen? And we'll get into that. And so you'll understand that when you're out doing this work in some place, so if you wish to do this after you learn these techniques, and you may have one of these orbs come in and hover in the group or just appear enigmatically quickly and then vanish. What was it? And you will have to then be able to go beyond the crossing point of light with your remote viewing capability to see who it was, what the message was. And to do that, you really have to understand the structure of how space-time matter and the three-dimensional, as they call it, real universe, is interfacing with these increasingly non-local aspects of creation, including the so-called astral and etheric, celestial, causal, sound, thought, vibration, and conscious level. And it is all interrelated. And think of it, just begin to think of it as a quantum hologram. You know, a hologram, if someone was showing a hologram in the center of this circle of Marilyn Monroe, if you took a piece of her skirt, the entire image of her would be in that. If you took a piece of that, in other words, it's all within. But this is a conscious quantum hologram. That is the nature of the cosmos. It is not the linear thing that we've been taught. And therefore, there is this non-local or omnipresent aspect of conscious mind and increasingly conscious aspects. And this is where it gets confusing. There's relativity within non-locality. Very important, because you cannot understand extraterrestrial technologies, transport systems, energy systems, without understanding relative non-locality. So we're going to get into these concepts, and then we're going to experience it. And maybe we'll vector in a craft over LAX like at O'Hare. Who knows? It's happened. So,
Very across the hall from us, there is a meeting about DOD contract.
perfect. Well, it follows me everywhere. But this is part of the duality that we live with, you know, so that we can be doing this a while at Joshua Tree a couple of days ago, and we have a celestial extraterrestrial craft literally manifest over the group, maybe 20, 30, 40 feet. And at the same time, we have right after that, a military Chinook helicopter coming in with electronic warfare equipment, zapping, trying to disrupt the event. But they can't, because we're in a state of consciousness beyond their reach. I mean, you wouldn't believe the things that happen. One night this past week up at Joshua Tree, we had a enormous military jet that came down about 200 feet AGL above ground level, vectored in right into Joshua Tree National Park in violation of the law at that altitude, aimed right towards us, and it was loaded with electrons. The most bizarre looking jet I've ever seen, and it was cruising at stall speed. It could, I mean, it was, if it had slowed down anymore, it would have crashed, and it was very low. And of course, it was right after we had had a number of ET craft that were appearing at our landing site, which I'll describe to you in a few minutes of why we are there. I hope you guys can join us up there when we're up there next, or at Mount Shasta when we do this, because it's here in California. It's the closest research facilities, landing places that we use, and they're not that far away. Mount Shasta, of course, in Northern California is further than here, but yeah, please, I'll make a circle for everyone.
Is it true that Mount Shasta doesn't get our voice with the heavy equipment so much as in the desert?
No. We have had even fighter jets come down a couple hundred feet above ground level, and you'll hear about an electromagnetic scalar weapon that was fired at us that impacted the mountain a couple hundred yards ahead of us. That was almost like a small nuclear bomb going off last year, or year before last. Anyway, you know, we're in the middle of a very big process of, without fear, of creating the whole foundation for universal peace. And it can't happen with us being the entry point. We, as humans, have to be the entry point for that to happen on Earth, because we're children of Earth. He isn't going to come from somewhere else. It can be assisted, and it can be watched, and it can be understood, and it can be a cooperative effort. But we are the primary movers, not me per se, but we, humans, are the primary movers of the destiny of Earth and the future of Earth. And so that's the responsibility we have, and that's the responsibility of this project. So with those introductory remarks, I'd like to just open it up to questions that people have from the previous workshop and lecture, so that you have a chance to have your heart's content and all your curiosities answered. So, yes, sir.
Do you have any long-term friendships with extraterrestrial beings?
Yes, very good question. We do. In the early days, there was a male extraterrestrial EB that came and that I had contact with back in 1990. That was, well, he had jet black hair like you. I forget your name. David. But he was white, very white, and blue eyes, but really black hair. Could have passed as a first cousin, and really handsome, but very definitely extraterrestrial, and he's still involved. But upon Sherry Adamack's death in January of 1998, the night that she passed away, and Sherry Adamack was my assistant and very close friend who was frankly murdered by these classified projects back then. She introduced me in a lucid dream that night, very lucid, like out of body, with this extraterrestrial senior ambassador to Earth, who is this too weird?
No.
Weird. Too bad, we're going to get weirder yet. And she was, if you can visualize, a head that's just like a round pumpkin. Head exactly like that. No hair. Almond eyes, shaped eyes with whites. Very pretty in her own, in her own species way. Diminutive features otherwise. And a small, fine nose and no pinna. Had no, very different from this other ET that I had. No outer flap of the ear, which is called the pinna. And just the very fine lips. And she was, the first meeting with her was this beautiful experience. And she exuded the almost perfect manifestation of kindness and compassion and radiated that. So I call her kindness.
You have dialogues with
And
them?
oh yes, yeah.
What do they talk about?
And well, that's a long discussion. But the first time that we then went out on an expedition, she showed up in this craft that is, and I don't know if you have the photos to pass around. Yeah, be great. All that stuff should be here. And there's this craft that is a beautiful cobalt blue light. Sometimes it's blue-white, diamond light. And we usually fly in and shine this brilliant light on our research group when we're out, and then turn and go out. But the essence of this extraterrestrial being will be then in the field bilocated on sort of like an astral hologram, scintillating, beautiful. And she's one of the first things that was in the conversation. You have to remember this is in '98, and then the Disclosure Project National Press Club event was 2001. And of course, the first thing I asked her is that, given the collateral damage, to use a military term, that we had suffered, should we proceed with the disclosure of all this at the level we were doing it, which of course involved Congress and the White House people in the back wanting to see this happen, but too chicken to do it, but having hundreds of these military guys who had top secret clearances coming forward. It's a very bold move of what we've been doing. I mean, it's just taking on the lion, as I explained this lion yesterday in the workshop. And this ET, Kindness, said, yes, if you can do it, do it. We need this done. So it was interesting. People often ask, how did you do this 2001 National Press Club event? I said, well, there's a lot of cooperation between my own guidance and work and the extraterrestrials and the white hats who are in the military and government who are being lied to about these projects. It's a complicated thing, and it's not what people think in terms of some grand conspiracy where everyone's lockstep together. And the vast majority of senior flag officers at the Pentagon and almost everyone in Congress, except a few of the people who are on that group's board, are in the dark about all this. It's not what you think, and including the President of the United States in the case of Clinton. Of course, we briefed him, and but what happened, of course, is that she said yes. And we had a conversation, and one of the things that was made very clear is that this is something that humans need to deal with, to educate each other, to disclose the information to each other, because the evidence is there. They don't want to force it, and by forcing it, it would just mean that we weren't ready. The sign that we're ready is the work that we're doing. See, people don't get it. It's very important. That's the sign that we're ready. Just like Dennis Kucinich, Congressman Kucinich, when I went into his office, he said, the fact that you are here means that time is short and it's time to deal with this. And he said that to everyone there. I have multiple witnesses and all the military guys who are with me and my staff. So I think that these, there is a lot of collaboration between our group as humans and these extraterrestrial civilizations that have key representatives that have interacted with us. And on every single expedition, except one that I can think of, since 1998, now that's now 9 years, this ET being and this craft has physically materialized and flown into the group or over the group and put this beautiful light over the group, what have you, something like that to acknowledge what we were doing every single time. So it's quite beautiful. And people say, well, what does this have to do with the passing of Sherry Adamek? And I said, well, Sherry is in the spirit world, in the astral body. But extraterrestrial civilizations see that as clearly as you and I see this. And there are humans who see that world as easily as you and I see this room. And many of you do as well in your inner sight, can and do, and particularly in the dream state. So what you realize is that when the body is left, it's like a cage that's open and the bird flies out, the bird being this astral body and the soul. And as such, can interact with these extraterrestrial beings quite easily, but so can we. But Sherry, one of the reasons she did not want to leave is she felt very guilty leaving me alone doing this work. And, it was very hard for her and hard for me. And she said some things to some people, and she finally passed away, if you read the account of it, when I went there and was by her bed and said, you can go now, we'll take care of this. But before she did, we talked about the fact that she would be doing this work with us on the other side with these extraterrestrial civilizations from that astral and celestial level. And that's a beautiful thing. And so we have that ongoing sort of multiple dimension connection with this, and that's how it happens. So we have, so anyway, I don't know if that answers your question. But
When you use the term ambassador, to me that implies dialogue and collaboration.
Correct.
So I'm real curious on to what extent that's already been developed. It would be useful for us to tune into what you're doing.
Oh, it's very developed, and you'll hear this afternoon, and if you what we just finished doing in Palm Springs, actually, for the last week, was a group of us sharing, about 20 people there, sharing experiences we'd had over the last 15 years with this, and the kinds of things that we have gotten. And that's going to be coming out in a sort of a book that will describe all that. And of course, we don't have enough time to go into all the specifics here. We only have 3 hours. Remember, time marches on whether we like it or not. But it is extensive, it's ongoing, and at all of these places where we've had these meetings, we've had these sort of experiences. And for example, at Blanca Peak in Colorado, which is the third highest peak in Colorado, there's a contact site that I remote viewed and found one night. And this contact site has been the site of many meetings between our group and these extraterrestrial civilizations. And the first time we did this, there were about 12 different beings that were there, and they were from different star systems, all of them. And scintillating further beyond where you could see them were all these celestial and angelic, and beyond that was this avatar being, the sort of the Godhead. It was this beautiful experience. And that was in 97 also, in 19...
Minutes of
July.
those meetings would be very useful.
Yes, well, of course, and but it's not a meeting. Remember, much of what this is happening is not sitting down and yakking about the weather, or it's not talking the way this is talking. It's packets of knowledge and exchangings of ideas, and it's more of even on an energy level. And often, for example, last week at Joshua Tree, we had this. We were in a circle like this with about this many people, in fact. Interestingly. And imagine just teleport yourself visually, and we're up in Joshua Tree at this site on Geology Tour Road in the center of Joshua Tree National Park, and we're in this state of meditation, and then we're doing a prayer for the earth, for the healing of the earth, with everyone in a spacecraft and in deep space connecting to these extraterrestrial people. And we're doing this together, and I'm speaking as all this is coming through. And when we get to a key point in this, we have all these electronic devices that we have that are magnetometers that pick up magnetic field flux, and laser and radar detectors that will pick up electromagnetic energy coming into an area. They're simple, but they work for detecting these craft, even when they're beyond the crossing point of light. But as they begin to bump up against a linear space-time electromagnetic flux field, they will send these detectors off, and they'll start beeping. And in her truck, one of them was going off, and we were at each point that we were at this key point in the meditation. It was very, very interesting. We're where there's no source of this. I mean, there's no radar, there's nothing out there. It's in the center of Joshua Tree National Park. And at a key point in this, suddenly, above the circle and a little to the south, on the south edge of the circle, this brilliant, almost explosion, starburst appears, where this craft appears and streams this light into everyone sees this. Even people with their eyes shut see the veins in their eyelids. And we're sitting in the middle of nowhere. But it wasn't light the way we think of it. It was packets of knowledge, and it was this streaming of information on a nonverbal level. Because remember, when you say apple, the word apple, 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 that's a word. But in your mind, you can see a red apple. That's astral. But inside that is the essence of the apple, that is the standing wave resonant frequency of the reality of that, and at a finest level. And knowledge can be transmitted that way, and it's pre-verbal. Okay? You understand? And many people who've had experiences like this will say, I don't know how I know this, but then it gets translated through their consciousness and mind and brain and what have you to these set of words. But it isn't the kind of dialogue the way that you think of. Now, often, of course, when we've had the ETs completely materialize and physically there, people hear the clicking sounds and different kinds of way they would talk, and that's really, very real. And in fact, in November when we were there were 4 ETs that completely materialized right to the south of the circle, exactly where this starburst happened, that was seen. And they were just standing there in the meditation with everyone. We were silent. And some people heard some clicking sounds and some other things. But, you know, the information and knowledge transfer is not always linear, oral, verbal. It can be, because they have electronics that do that, sort of a universal translator, I call it, that does that. They've been reported. But when you're in a deep state of consciousness, that's not necessary, and it can bypass linear verbal transmission, and in a fraction of a second or a few seconds, you can get books downloaded. And it's like, in fact, one person who was there who had never been on one of these things and was an OR nurse and was rather skeptical, she said it was like she was just downloaded. And then everyone was in this super high state of consciousness the whole evening, and high energy. And we were there 4 hours. It seemed like it had been an hour and a half. It was like, it was time, space, everything changed. It was amazing. Well, Dan was there, and Linda, and a few other people. Time for some other people. Yes?
According to what I've read from your sources, you imply that all ETs are good and think of to our benefit. But from some other sources, we can learn that there are some of them who are not as good as might think, or that there are some other agendas, like reptilian
Yes, you weren't here yesterday. Yeah. Well, we can cover that again briefly. I don't know if you know what a PLF is, a program life form. We have been making these since after World War II. They are genetic experiments, and they pass very well as aliens. And I know the facilities where we've been making these. And often, the classified projects that are trying to frighten the public. And I know men who have been on these assault teams. They're called abduction teams, but it's an assault team. And one of the institute, a private institute, I got a very secret document that describes this, and they describe the stagecraft of using not only program life forms, but also men in things that look like very good uniforms to be on ARVs, these alien reproduction vehicles, using psychotronic and radionic systems to engage people and have a pseudo-contact experience. It's very frightening. There's a lot that I've written on this. And by the way, Martin Cannon here in the 80s, although he's now since disappeared, had a 2,000-page collection of very good research on this. And a lot of this information I then got to a man in, I think, the United Kingdom who wrote a book called MELAB, Military Abductions. And this is part of the conditioned response because they need people to have something to hate and be afraid of. It's just like, I don't know if those of you who studied World War II, how Hitler and Goebbels and how they were very, very good at demonizing Jews. And they even showed them, as these caricatures. And of course, they were going to rape your women folk and steal your baby. And their blood would be used in matzah meal on Passover and all this kind of stuff. And of course, none of it's true. But it was highly effective in creating a mob mentality in the public of hate and fear that could then support the war effort. Because it's not like a handful of people did the Holocaust, contrary to what people would have you believe. There was a lot of cooperation. And also, the public had to look the other way as the Mercedes-Benz pulled up next to the Jewish industrialist home and they were hauled off to Auschwitz. But to get people to that level, I'm being quite direct since you asked this question, the big game since the World War II era has ended has been the next level of super system trapping, racist super system trapping, which requires an enemy. And even if you say, oh, well, they're all great ETs except this one race who happens to look this way or sound this way or what have you, it's still a racist and completely unfounded point. Now, I'm not saying that no one has had an encounter where they weren't startled or frightened, but they certainly haven't been harmed. And the things that are interesting, if you look at the abduction research industry, which is a very big industry, they're funding, the men that I know, or the ones that you know as household names, were getting their funding from the Bank of Liechtenstein, the Liechtenstein family, which were the primary funders of the Third Reich, as you know, much more so than the Swiss, or even Ford or Watson at IBM or any of those guys. And so there's this sort of interesting international collective of I call them transnational fascists, that very much want to grow, in the post-World War II era, they wanted to grow a new kind of war. And what they couldn't do overtly with the Third Reich, they've done covertly. But the psychological warfare value of this is to put out a lot of frightening information to people. And so I'm not saying that no one's had contact that startled them, but the sort of things that are put out in the mass media and the public on this are really false. So I think that and this is stuff that we have dispositive proof for. Not only witnesses who have been on, I know an Army Ranger, for example, a couple of them, who have been on these abduction squads. And this one said, you have no idea how many people we've done this to, so that there would begin to be this new myth that would support Star Wars, and that even senior military and political figures have had this happen, so that they would begin to hate these visitors. And Hollywood is very infiltrated by these interests, and this is why to get a movie done of Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, which would be a fantastic true story to make a screenplay, if any of you are screenplay writers. But when I've met with some of the top people in Hollywood, they get their funding cut off when they want to develop that project. But if they want to make Independence Day, where Will Smith says, let's go kick alien butt. And the theme of it was the whole world was going to be united. And if you look at that movie, you had people in Africa and you had the Middle East, and they were all getting united. They'd been fighting each other. Now they were going to unite against a threat from outer space. So they were going to grow the war machine from a international level of fighting. It used to be tribal, and then nation state, or city state, and then nation state. Now they want to grow it global. And to do that, you have to have an enemy. Obviously, you cannot justify a multi-trillion-dollar warfare system in space unless you have convinced and brainwashed and done the psychological warfare preparation for that. And this is what Wernher von Braun said on his deathbed to one of our witnesses, who was his personal spokeswoman for the last 5 years or 4 years of his life. She said that he just came clean and said, look, this is what the agenda's been since he was brought in under Operation Paperclip from Hitler's rocket V2. He built the V2 rocket and then became the core of the space program in the United States. But this was the agenda that was being hashed all the way since the late 40s all through the 60s. And by certainly that time, they had the means to effect this. Now, one of our chief projects have been to brief senior military and government people who are not in the loop on these classified projects, because they're very shadowy, very compartmented, and access is very limited, so that they know that this agenda is in a sense, a cosmic Gulf of Tonkin strategy. If you remember the Gulf of Tonkin, we basically staged attacks on our vessels in the Gulf of Tonkin and Vietnam so we could justify a buildup of the war. And he was there, and I know a lot of men who were there, and it was what's called a false INW. If you study war planning, it's a false indication and warning, or a deceptive indication and warning. And these deceptive indications and warnings are very effective because they fool people. Now, one of my chief jobs has been in terms of protecting the consciousness of Earth so that we don't get stampeded into, as Douglas MacArthur said to Congress in the 60s, and there's a transcript of this, the next World War, World War III, will be interplanetary war. This is a quote. Now, this is where they've been trying, the warmongers and the money whores, and all, they want to move things in that direction. And I'm saying, oh yeah, well, they can only do that if people are deceived. Now, most people who've studied this issue have absorbed into their consciousness deceptive indications and warning type of stagecraft. And so that I would say somewhere between 90 and 95% of everything that is extant out there in the literature, videos, UFO circuit, what have you, Coast to Coast AM, is deceptive indications and warnings. Now, the purveyors of it may not know that they're just, lackeys of that. They may not know this. But it's been my job to penetrate these projects and know this. And, of course, other people have as well before I came along, such as Martin Cannon, who had thousands of pages of documentation of this. But once he started talking about it, he was blacklisted from all UFO conferences. He was blacklisted, and that happens very much so. I know people who have been part of the Intruders Foundation and Bud Hopkins abduction group, that if they come in with a story that's not a MELAB, that's very frightening and negative, they are shown the door and are not allowed to talk. And his executive director, called me up back in the 90s and says, Dr. Greer, you're absolutely right. We know that a lot of these are clearly have covert military involvement, but it's completely being covered up. So then you have to find out where they're getting their money and funding from. And when you follow the money, it's not hard to figure it out. So that's been part of what we've had to do. Now, what I tell people is that, all right, all that stuff, you got to know the lay of the land. We're staying with the things that are the truth, and that's the positive future for humanity. And a point I make it to people is that on a scientific basis, these things don't stand up to scrutiny. And here's why. First of all, any civilization that was, these horrible things, they could just simply eliminate all life on Earth that they didn't want here in a fraction of a second with the kind of technologies that allow for interstellar travel. Secondly, they don't need the Earth. There are millions, if not billions, of planets that have biospheres like Earth that don't have advanced civilizations on them. So this sort of fantasy that they're here because there's something here they can't get. You can travel through interstellar space. You can materialize and dematerialize things. There's no element, nothing here. This is why Zecharia Sitchin is all wrong about the early connections with the Anunnaki or whatever, and then needing to have us as slaves for gold. I mean, good grief! I mean, the technologies that allow for interstellar travel, you can have any element made. In fact, I know a guy with about a 3,000 to 5,000 degree plasma reactor that is making transmutation of the elements today on Earth with really kind of primitive stuff. And so, you would not need to go through interstellar space and turn a bunch of early humans into slaves to be mining gold. But again, this is all a tribalistic paranoia. And people buy into it because we are emerging from a time of global conflict and tribal paranoia and conflict and racism. And so it's very easy to use that to then get people psychologically adapted for the next level of conflict. And I tell people, just don't be deceived. Very important not to buy into those things. The other thing is that you look at this thing, well, they need our sperm and egg. Well, actually they don't, because even in the really advanced classified genetics engineering programs that have been going on for decades, believe me, we were cloning and doing genetic stuff with, Dolly the sheep was not the first cloned mammal that you hear about. There are classified projects in the Dulce complex up near Four Corners and other places that have been going on for decades. I know a man in the 60s who was in a program like that, and they were growing all these different kinds of life forms in there from basic materials. So all they'd have to do is retrieve a hair follicle or anything. They wouldn't need to drag someone kicking and screaming on board a spacecraft to snatch their egg and your sperm. I mean, if you have a high school level of genetics at this stage of biotechnology, I mean, my daughter who's at UCSF doing her PhD, we talk about it, we just laugh. Because, I mean, even human technology would obviate the need for such a clumsy endeavor. But it does sow the same seeds of fear, because think about it. We still have tribalistic attacks going on this planet. And if you look at what's going on in Darfur, I mean, you have one tribal race attacking another, where their women folk are being raped and the children taken out into sexual slavery. So they want to use that leitmotif to disinform and scare people, because it hits a very primal, almost encoded tribalistic fear that is beyond rationality. But when you study it and stand back and look at it, and you see this, it's sort of like the Wizard of Oz, when they found out it was this old man behind the curtain pulling all these levers. So much of this phenomenon that people report is like this this old gray man behind the curtain pulling all these levers, and it's immensely effective to most people, because they haven't had the ability to penetrate what these projects are about. Now, that's one of the chief things we've tried to do in the last 15 years, is separate out how much of this is disinformation and how much of it is actual events that's extraterrestrial. And so you have multiple phenomena going on. There's the extraterrestrial events that can be very unusual, of course, because the manifestations of an interstellar civilization is not going to look like 20th century or 21st century Earth technology. You have people confusing encounters with astral beings that are not extraterrestrial but are very real, and thinking they're extraterrestrial, because we live in the space age, so they conflate that experience with ETs. Then you have this human deception project that's very well funded and quite sophisticated, with the electronics they have and the alien reproduction vehicles that look like UFOs and would pass to the average person as, wow, that's really an ET thing. It couldn't be made on Earth because it doesn't have a propeller or a jet engine. Not true. We have had things that look like UFOs since at least the 50s that have been test flown. And I have photographs from the late 50s and 60s, one taken by a Navy captain that was absolutely an alien reproduction vehicle that was using anti-gravity. And one of the scientists we're working with actually helped build the early coils, the high voltage coils that allow for mass cancellation effect and the levitation of these objects back in the 60s as they got better and better. So you have that phenomenon. And all of it gets thrown into this sort of collection and mixed together. So discernment is very important. And without the discernment, you're lost. But how do you get the discernment? That's a big part of the series of these 3 books that we put out, is all that information in there. And a lot of it is disturbing to people because they have bought into a belief system. They believe that there are the white, Nordic, blonde, blue-eyed, good ETs, and they always look like a wonderful Swedish babe. Do you see? And then the ones that are dark and have a funny-looking head and a different nose and different eyes, those are the bad ETs. Oh, well, please, this is nothing short. It's just interplanetary racism. And so I tell people we need to be careful not to project anthropocentrically the bane of human conflict that we have here onto this emerging relationship. And so my chief task has been to protect that, clarify it, and then positively go out there without prejudice and without buying into all the negative imagery, because you really can't make contact. If you go out there and say, oh, we're going to be an ambassador to these people, but if you're blue-eyed, white, and Nordic-looking from the Pleiades, come and let's have bagels and lox. And if you look like this, I don't want you to come because I've been convinced, even though I've never met you, that you're this horrible creature. This is just exactly, I mean, having grown up in the South during the Civil Rights era, I mean, it is just exactly the kind of racist imagery and racist, xenophobic stuff that has been the bane of the human existence for, thousands of years. So what we have to do is leave that thinking behind. You cannot be an ambassador to any one of these civilizations if you still have that mindset, because they're all working cooperatively. The people I know who've had extensive contact with these ETs, and I mean even military people, will tell you that you'll see all these different types of life forms together on a craft. There's not Star Wars going out there on in there. That's another Hollywood movie, like Star Trek and Star Wars and all this, marauding different races of different values. The fact is that if you're still operating from that level of hostility and violence, you're not allowed to leave your biosphere, which is why we've been thrown back like a bad penny. Even though Ben Rich of Lockheed Skunk Works said, yeah, we already have the means to travel among the stars, but those technologies are locked up in a black box that take an act of God to get them out to benefit the world. This is the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, said this to 3 people on my team. And the fact of the matter is that we're not bamming around the stars out there because the human civilization has not reached, even though technologically we are capable, socially and spiritually we're not, you see. And so our technological prowess has exceeded our spiritual and social development. And that's a very dangerous time for a civilization from a universal point of view. No, it's dangerous for us on Earth, of course, because we could turn the world into a smoking heap with nuclear weapons and worse, these longitudinal scalar type weapons that are the really classified systems. But, we're a threat also to other civilizations. And I always tell people who get into this discussion about the alien agenda, I said, I'd be more concerned about the human agenda. I'd be more concerned about why we're putting weapon systems in space. I'd be more concerned about why we have platforms in space that have been fully operational since the mid-'60s, and I know men who've worked on them, where we have very advanced electromagnetic weapons and detection systems that target these objects and to kill them, to knock them down. I'd be wondering why near Eglin Air Force Base, there's a colonel there I know, they had built this U-shaped electromagnetic pulse device that was slaved to a radar system so that every time one of these ET craft manifested or was about to, they'd pick it up and they'd hit it and they'd knock it into the Gulf of Mexico so they could then retrieve it. I'd ask on and on and on and on. I'd be more concerned about that. And I think that, Gordon Crichton, who for years published a Flying Saucer Review, which, of course, Prince Philip and the royal family subscribe to. I know this for a personal fact. I just know personal fact. He told me, he was military intelligence, British intelligence for years, he said the problem was about the time we started detonating nuclear weapons and going into space, a huge red warning flag went over Earth. Warning, this civilization has reached the nuclear threshold and space, but have not learned to live together in peace. And we, therefore, would be a threat to the cosmic order. And so I put this back the other way. Instead of sort of this, I say, really a lot of what's talked about in terms of the alien agenda is really an anthropocentric projection. I'd say let's hold up a mirror and let's deal with our own stuff. And then we're going to find that the universe will open its arms to us very friendly. Now, have there been ET events where they have tried to interfere with these sorts of misadventures? Yes. Carl Sagan, who many people thought was an anti-nuclear activist, was actually on the team that helped do the planning and design for a nuclear weapon and missile system to be detonated on the moon. I have personal witnesses to this, and it's in the Disclosure Project book, the people who know about this. And as this missile went exo-atmospheric, as it was about leaving the Earth's atmosphere, it was intercepted by an extraterrestrial vehicle and neutralized. Now, if you were a military person, you would go, oh, these aliens are hostile. Well, they're not. They're just concerned with our hostility, and they do not want us going outside the biosphere of Earth with weapons of mass destruction and with these sort of space capabilities. So I think that's a very, very important thing to understand. And it's fundamentally important to going out to make contact, because when we make contact, we need to be able to discern what part of this is the deceptive phenomenon that's actually made by humans, what part of it is actually extraterrestrial. And we have also found that if somebody has these sort of fears and misconception about the ET presence, they won't come. They're not interested because they feel like that you need to at least figure out that we are at a stage in our existence. Now, a lot of people say I'm just Pollyannish and naive. People who know me know there's nothing Pollyannish and naive about me. But I'm very skeptical of the fear-mongering because I've been able to track it to the source, and I find that it's a human source that's trying to deceive people and scare people. I don't know if that answers your question. It's sort of a brief overview of, yeah. It's a very important question, great question, because that is the dominant paradigm out there in ufology and the public and media, and it's a false paradigm. Yes?
There are authors who are really positioned, like David Icke and all that. They have this precision agenda, the whole series of PhDs and stuff like that. So I guess that would fall into that category.
It's also an issue of light attracting light.
Yeah. Well, it's not even that. I mean, we're not. It's not like we're going to be out there only for that reason. I have said to people, if they have dispositive proof that there is an extraterrestrial civilization that have destructive tendencies and interests in humanity, I would want to meet with them first. You need a diplomatic and ambassador project to someone who would be like that more than you do to someone who's friendly, don't you? So that's the whole point of diplomacy. So the whole concept of being an ambassador to the universe is to be like that for ourselves. We want to be that person, that movement. And so I really say I don't really care what the agenda of our visitors are. I think that it's absolutely benign, because if it wasn't, I don't think that we would have gotten away with the terrible military things that we've done and not had severe repercussions if they were not enormously patient and very kind. And what's interesting is that we're the only group on Earth that for now 15 years, 16 years, have gone all over the world and have made contact and had really close encounters of the fifth kind, meaning a close encounter that humans have set up to welcome them, with thousands of people over the years who've seen it. Never have we been frightened, never have we been harmed. Never has there been any untoward thing happen to us. Now, we've had military things that have tried to suppress the activity that have been harmful. We have never had anything from the extraterrestrial that has been anything like that. And so, and the closer I get to people who are in the center of the control group, who's keeping the secrecy and whatnot, at the very center is a group that is the hardcore, that want conflict. They want an eschatological, end-of-the-world battle in space, like the Scientology movie that John Travolta was in. And that is the agenda. It has nothing to do with the extraterrestrial presence. And so we have found also that when, I'll give you an example, there was someone who was with us in Joshua Tree. I'll refer to Joshua Tree a lot since we're so near there. It's in your neighborhood if you're from the LA area. And this was 96. And there was a man there who had an agenda. He was very fear-based and had all this prejudice, but he also wanted to get close to the phenomenon into what we were doing so that he would understand the technology so he could be, and I'm quoting here, I didn't know it at the time, but later a friend of his told me this, the next Rockefeller of energy. His goal was really just selfish. And every time we had an encounter, he wasn't there. He either, fell down or was sick or was stuck somewhere. It was like the hand of God just moved them. And it's a fascinating thing. And in the big event that happened that year, we were at this one site, and I had been told in my meditation remote view that the ETs were going to come very late. And I knew we were supposed to move from that site. So we were leaving this one site that was sort of below some cliffs. And we went back up the gravel part of Geology Tour Road, and we were driving along, and Linda was there. And there were about, 15, 20 people saw this. An enormous and just astonishing couple 100 feet diameter ET craft, and it was shaped like a Hershey's Kiss. It was flat on the bottom and then came up like this, and then there was a sort of and it was teal green, and it was this blue-green, gorgeous, gorgeous color. And then as it came down, it didn't come down like this, it came straight down out of the zenith. And just before it appeared, the dashboard lights of my vehicle went dimmed down and came back. And I turned to Sherry and one of my daughters in the back. I said, "They're here. This is an electromagnetic, I know." And seconds later, here it comes, and it's so bright, it lights up the entire desert floor of Joshua Tree. It was like, oh my God. And of course, it looked like it was going to crash. It was going at enormous velocity. And it was, like I said, it was this beautiful teal green with this sort of green and white scintillating light, almost like the Hershey's Kiss thing you pull. I mean, I call it the Hershey Kiss. And it came straight down and then went vanished and went into the desert underground. And they were showing us their UGB there, the extraterrestrial underground base that was there. And that's where we do our field work. That's where we were this past week. It's an amazing place. But this man, who I didn't know at the time had all these hidden agendas, had this what I call a road slug. You know, the road RVs? I call them road slugs, because they're just like sluggish and they use, so much. And he was kind of stuck with that. And so he was nowhere near it. And he didn't see anything that whole time. And this has happened over and over and over again. And what I say to people is that they're able to scan people and see, exactly what you're doing. We have an extraterrestrial probe. This is like a Fibonacci sequence. This was filmed with a SuperShot IR at our training at my farm in Virginia in October, a couple months ago. We'll pass this around. And it's only in 3 frames of the video, a few fractions of a second. But I sensed it remotely in my consciousness and was up like this, pointing at it. And in the frame, you can see me go like this, pointing out to people with my finger tracking it. And it's an amazing bit of video. But this probe is an extraterrestrial communication and scanning probe. And they scan. And they interface with thought and consciousness to know who's there, what are their intentions, the whole thing. And that's what happens initially. There's this evaluation of a group. And you'll see these things. Now, most people didn't see this. I see them because I first feel them and see them in my remote view. And I've trained my eyes to be able to see very quick phenomena, very, very quick expressions of these ET technology. But then it was in the center of the circle, standing there scintillating. But right at the crossing point of light, it was almost like a wave distortion in the air. This is at night, but people who were trained could see it. Now, at the time, I think everybody thought, oh, you're making this up, until this man went through and looked frame by frame through his video, and here it is. I'll pass it around. It's very interesting. And that's another key point, is that the prerequisite for contact and doing this work seriously in real time, making contact with these ETs, is to be free of the prejudice and have a sort of an innocence, and I don't mean that in the way of stupidity, an innocence of pure-heartedness and acceptance, and let it happen, and to step beyond the human condition of fear into the condition of this unbounded state of cosmic mind where there is no possibility of fear. So that no matter how unusual the expression may be of how these ETs may appear, you're not going to react in a frightened way. You're going to be able to be centered in this deep place of calm awareness. And I've learned that is really the Rosetta Stone of ET communication, as I call it. It is this state of the samadhi state, that state of pure consciousness, and being established in that. Because then you're beyond normal, human fight or flight response. You're beyond fear. You're beyond anthropocentric blockages in your perception, and you're actually able to see that these ET life forms are awake beings like we are, and you are one with them. So that's the heart of compassion for interplanetary contact. And to be an interplanetary ambassador, which is what we train people to be, that is the beginning point. So I tell people this state of pure consciousness and samadhi is the beginning point of being an ambassador to these civilizations, not the end point of anything. So we start from there and then go. And then it's amazing what happens. This past week, when everyone got into that resonance field of deep consciousness, I was leading a meditation, when everyone got to that place, the place of the placeless, the state of mind that is the singularity, the one mind of the cosmic being, and we were in this state together, that's when they appeared, and only then. And of course, all the electromagnetic things going off. Some people say, isn't that distracting? I say, yes, sometimes, but it's better than, that way there is some physical way of knowing that there is something that's not just a celestial event going on, that it's an actual technological event, which is very important to understand, because there are other things that happen.
It also helps too in the group.
There's a seat there that you can have if you. Oh, I think they left. Okay. Yes, another question.
I want to follow up on something you said before, and I listened to your meditation tape coming up. Periodically, I've had an experience, I want to know if anybody else in the group has had it, where you're being downloaded with information on a nonlinear basis, and the manifestation of this, it always comes into the left ear, and it's always a high-pitched frequency that will last for anywhere up to a minute. And later on, you get the conscious message. Mm-hmm. And I want to know if that's part of the process. It happens periodically.
People pick this up different ways. But I will tell you that, in fact, this past week and 1 year when we were at Mount Shasta a couple years ago, we had a tone. And I'm going to play for you later these the CSETI beeping tones that we transmit out into space. Because we have these tones that were quite remarkable. And so it's a linear electromagnetic vector to our location. And then we also have these lasers that we use. And I'll have all that here today. But what's interesting is that when we were at this one spot, after we had done this protocol and we had the tones beeping and we're transmitting them over a radio frequency and we had the laser lights going up, and then we went into this meditation, there was this beautiful multi-harmonic tone that everyone heard. But it was so unusual that everyone heard it, but it formed a shape. Name and form. It's very Vedic. The sound was so developed and so full that you could see the sound. You could see the shape of the sound. And it was truly a type of harmonic. And it was extraterrestrial. And this was heard by everyone. And then we had an amazing encounter took place. So, yes, that does happen. And we have often, in fact, the first time that I was at, I had these tones that we have that were actually recorded by the BBC in a crop circle. And it was an unusual electromagnetic tone that came through broad daylight, and it actually did about $75,000 in damage to their cameras, but they recorded this tone. And then we took it and analyzed it and found its component sounds. And it's a harmonic, and it's quite interesting. And the first time I took those and then rebroadcast them out and played them, we had just a boom box and play it. And I was at Marconi's Hill, where the first telegraph was sent in the world, ironically, in England. And here comes this tone, and a little while later, it starts drizzling and raining. We're all getting ready to get in our vehicles, and everyone hears this binaural, and it was this omnidirectional tone. You couldn't pinpoint where it was. Like it was coming from the center of infinite space, but it was heard by everyone. So it had this omnidirectional quality to it. Amazing. Everyone heard this. And in fact, we have gotten some recordings back of these when they've come. And sometimes they'll actually put it back through our electronic equipment. We'll be transmitting on a radio frequency, one of these walkies, and while you're transmitting, you're not supposed to be able to receive, but all of a sudden it'll start coming back through the electronics. Strange stuff. We have several hundred types of extraterrestrial technology phenomena that we're going to catalog in this new book so that people understand what this stuff is and what it means. It's very important. Of course, we can't go through all that today, but it is a very important point. And what you described, Mr. Fox, is very real. Yes, some other questions. Yes, sir.
In your interaction with the information, do you ever get to the concept of the ultimate creator with all beings? And if so, how do they grapple with the chicken or the egg phenomena when you get to that concept?
Yes, we do actually get to that concept very much so. And in reality, there's no chicken and no egg, but one being. And this gets into this is where we're going to leave linear concepts of understanding reality. But yes, but that absolutely they have an understanding of a universal supreme being, conscious being, and also the understanding of the cosmology that how from the utter nothingness of the fullness of the absolute mind does all this come into being. How is that? What is that?
I guess that gets hard for people to grab their head around, I think. At least.
Well, that's a big part of these books. If you read these books that I have out, and particularly the most recent one, and this meditation, do you all have that, this CD? This is a meditation that takes you into that state so that unfolds. And you actually see it. And when we go to Creststone, there's a Buddhist center that has one of these beautiful domes. And I sit and spend about 45 minutes where I go to that state. We transcend and go to the unbounded absolute, and then we emerge and go through the process of the differentiation and manifestation of the cosmology, the whole cosmos, from the finest Godhead, the personal aspect of the Creator, all the way to the material cosmos and stars and sun and what have you.
So you just kind of got to let that concept get out of your head to let the information in, if you know what I mean.
Well, if they're pre-existing linear concepts that are incorrect, yes, they have to be not let go. They need to be built upon. And it's sort of like kindergarten. I mean, when you're in kindergarten, you learn 1 and 1 is 2. You're not learning calculus or quantitative analysis or any of that. So it's not that it's incorrect. It's just that it's based in a linear and perhaps atavistic, a more or less developed level of understanding. So I don't like to think of it as being wrong. It's just incomplete. 1 and 1 is 2. That's correct. But it doesn't mean it's the complete knowledge of all mathematical systems. You see? So you build upon it. It's building. And the best teacher is experience. And this is why, the catechisms, as it were, or dogma of specific belief needs to be kind of let that be. And then you need to get to this state where you experience the mind itself and the being itself. So, and then you can see what makes sense. And, all this is folded within all of you. I mean, all of us are conscious. And that consciousness itself, the silent, undifferentiated aspect of that mind, is the universal being. People don't like to admit that. But you see, here you sit, hearing my voice, and you're awake. What is that, awake? How are you awake? As your eyes are open, listening, begin to reflect on the awakeness itself, the essence of being awake. Well, that's this silent screen upon which all perceptions are falling and being perceived. And if you just let the mind become empty and pure of all distractions, and you're just left with that awake mind and that awake being, that is the cosmic mind. And that is the state of nirvana, samadhi, the beatific state, the early Christians called it, what have you. It's a very real experience. And this is, of course, meditation techniques and various things facilitate experiencing that in prayer and meditation. But you need to understand kind of what the experience is. And then when it happens, you do know it's happening. And the later development is that you then begin to function from that level, where you're awake in a cosmic way. You know, the mind that you're conscious with, you know, and you're experiencing it as universal and boundless. And then you can begin to see remote places. And you begin to know things that in a linear way you could not know. And you are able to then vector spacecraft in. This is what we do. This is the core of the CE5 protocol. So I always say that consciousness itself, the pure mind, is the Rosetta Stone of the CE5 contact. And which is why the head of Army Intelligence got so mad at me. If you've read the book, he realized that we had discovered this, and I was sharing it with thousands of people. Now, of course, you know, I've been called all kinds of horrible things for talking about this. And it opens you up to all kinds of misinterpretations and ridicule, because we're not supposed to talk about these sort of experiences. But in fact, it's why I was invited to brief the CIA director and the head of intelligence for the Joint Staff. And now we have a major foreign government wanting us to set up a contact CE5 so that their heads of state and their leadership can have an open meeting with these visitors. And that would be the end of the secrecy. And we're talking a major G7 country. Okay? So, yes. Now, so because, you know, people in the know realize that any civilization that's interstellar isn't staying locked into linear space-time or even the speed of light of electromagnetism. They're growing beyond the crossing point of light. And when you do, you have just entered mentalis, the territory of mind. Shanti, peace, the peace of mind. Mentalis shanti. And what happens at that point is that there's deeper and deeper and profound levels. But it enables you to then awaken. And that's why, you know, these week-long trainings, we spend many, many hours through the week when we're not out under the stars at night, going through a process where I'll put a box in the center of the room with something in it. Nobody knows what's in it. And we'll go into this state of cosmic mind and silent meditation. Then I ask people to know that the mind is omnipresent and see what is inside the box. It's amazing how people have these breakthroughs, and they absolutely see it. People who've never meditated, I've done this with I was asked to do this in Switzerland at one of these big business roundtable things, and there were vice presidents of software companies and the head of Medtronics and the chairman of Canon was there and all these people. And you know, I was invited to be a fly on the wall as the kind of the freak. But they all wanted to know this, and when they heard this is what we were doing, we just impromptu took a few minutes and formed a circle. It took about an hour, actually. And I made a few comments about the nature of consciousness, led a guided meditation, and they got it. And it's so I'll never forget this chartered accountant from Sheffield, England, going, "I can't believe it. This can't be. This is ruining my life. I can't believe this is possible. This must be rubbish. How have you done?" And it was this whole thing. It was fascinating. And because these were not, you know, New Age people at a UFO conference or a Conscious Life Expo. These were, the captains of industry. And it was very interesting. And, you know, I try to share that with folks like that, you know, so that they begin to understand. And then I said, well, of course. And when you think about it, just exactly what the CIA director's wife said when, you know, we had this meeting, and it was not the CIA director, it was his wife who really wanted to know how the communication and how their communication can take place across interstellar distances. And I explained the nature of conscious mind and the fact that the thought, directed coherent thought, and we call this protocol coherent thought sequencing. Once you're in a state of unbounded mind, you can remote view a craft anywhere, maybe underground, maybe in deep space, maybe out of our galaxy. Connect to it, and then you zoom in, and you show them through a coherent thought. And that kind of coherent thought, from a universal aspect of mind, interfaces with their universal communication system. Absolutely does. And then they vector right in. It's like a laser light, but it's thought. And you have a whole group doing this. And that's why we have this very high rate of contact, as long as the group is there. Now, what's interesting is the compassion that they have always shown. And last year, about 15 months ago, actually, November 05, we were at the Joshua Tree site. I like sharing these stories. I share these stories because they're very illustrative of the meaning behind our contact. And we were in this state of meditation and deep consciousness, and I was leading one of these. And then afterwards, we were just sitting in silence together. And this one person who has had a lot of childhood trauma and anxiety was specifically mentally asked by an ET. I mean, it was like this clear throat. Is it okay if we appear now? And he was the person who, in a sense, needed to give that permission. Everyone else would have been okay, but they didn't want to do anything that would have caused sort of a PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder reaction by suddenly appearing. And he said, "Oh, yes." And about 5 seconds after he answered yes, while we're all sitting there, here comes this craft, and it literally, right about 15 to 20 feet above the group, materializes, comes through the crossing point of the light, and flies at a fairly low, floats over us. I mean, if I could have been on my chair and jumped up, I could have touched the underside of it. And it was this amazing harmonic sound it was making. Wah, 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 wah. Yeah, like a didgeridoo. It was like that. Wah, 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 wah. And then it got just past the circle and vanished, dematerialized. And it was amazing. But they asked permit, and this is like, people are there going, "Oh my God." Yeah. And it was like, oh yes, this stuff is for real. But they were very compassionate. And the same thing, if you study the 1992 landing at Alton Barnes in England, we had, that was before I started training people on these week-long intensives in cosmic consciousness and developing the remote viewing and all this. I just thought everyone could just go out and do this, and they'd show up and everybody be fine as frog's hair, as we say in the South. Well, they weren't fine as frog's hair. When this event happened, we were at this 1,800-acre estate that we were allowed to use as part of the Royal Trust lands, and this craft appeared in a field just right near where we were, and as we went into this state of we were waiting for it because we had been meditating in the evening, and we had moved. It had gotten rainy. It's a long story. The whole account is in the first book, Extraterrestrial Contact, the Evidence and Implications, which we have. But there was a woman there who was a PhD psychologist. First red flag. And she had done a lot of work with abductionists and had taken into her subconsciousness a lot of fear. But she had taken an intellectual bypass around it. She hadn't really dealt with it. She just said, "Oh yeah, I'm ready for contact," and let them come, and they can come to my patio off my house, and we'll have bagels and lox and cream cheese, and it'll be great. So here it is, and of course, it was all in her head, and she didn't understand that this is for real. I mean, what we're doing here, as opposed to the science that begins and ends with mere words, as they say about psychology. And sorry, but she was absolutely stunned. And here is this disc, about 100-foot diameter disc, completely materialized in the field we're in. I mean, we're not, it's, when you say, "Oh, well, it's over there on the other side of the mountain," and this is in the field. And it has these gorgeous celestial colored lights going. It was going around counterclockwise, like this. But the lights were kind of bleeding back and forth into each other, every kind of beautiful color. But it's light and color like you will never see on Earth because of the purity of how these ET craft manifest through the crossing point of light, the astral and etheric, and come as a completely single, seamless, perfect, pure metallic, pure light, pure everything. I mean, it's just highly refined. And so I said, "Well, get the light," because I wanted to signal to it, because it was signaling. And we want to invite it to come closer. It was a few 100 feet away. but about 10 feet above the field. But we were on a rise, so it was right at eye level, and it was this shape, and it came up like this, and then had a few amber lights on the top of it, and it was gorgeous, and like a jewel hovering there, silent, a little bit of a sound like a transformer, just slightly. And here it comes, and she says, "Oh no, don't do that." I said, "What do you mean don't do that? That's what we're here for." And she fell apart like a $3 watch. She really did. I mean, you know, and it was a close, very close encounter, and there was a lot of electrostatic phenomena. We had a lot of piloerection. No, that's not a sexual term. It's when the hair stands up on end, and you know, from the electromagnetism. And then my compass was going like the craft was going counterclockwise. The magnetic field flux was causing the needle of the compass to go around counterclockwise, but not fast, very slowly. And it did this for an hour.
Almost the same rate as the light?
No, it was it had to do with the distance and everything else. So after they sensed her fear, because I was on board the craft remote viewing conversing with the visitors, they backed off, and they very gently stopped, and backed off, and then went up into the foggy clouds, and then stayed above us at a distance that she was comfortable with. Now, over an hour, this needle kept going around counterclockwise until it made one complete turn. Over an hour, it took that long. And you could watch it. It was like, oh my God, like watching the minutes on a hand. And at the end of that, they opened up the clouds, because they can do this. They opened up the clouds, and at this point, it was maybe a couple thousand feet up, and it was this beautiful jewel, and I signaled it to it, and it signaled back, saying goodbye, and out into space and left. And what that taught me was that this poor soul had taken was not grounded in a deep enough state of consciousness to go beyond the embedded program of our society on this subject that is very fear-based, even though intellectually she thought she had. And that she needed this training in consciousness and to become a true ambassador from the level of cosmic consciousness. If you're going to be a cosmic ambassador, you must have cosmic awareness. And this is a prerequisite. So now folks don't come out with us unless they are doing that. And because, just out of compassion to the person, because when some of these extraterrestrial expressions of their existence happen, they can be very close. And if somebody has these is still centered in the little self, the little ego of fear, then this can overwhelm them, even though nothing adverse is happening. So the power of being able to be, as Krishna said to Arjuna on the battlefield in the Bhagavad Gita, a little of this, capital T, this state of cosmic mind, eliminates all fear. And it's true. And that's how we do what we're doing. It's also how we're doing the Disclosure Project. I have no fear about going into a military facility that's an underground base. That's a top secret SCI facility where I'm not supposed to be there. I go. I've done it. It's a hilarious story. You want to hear this funny story? It's like the Jedi, when they put a thing. One of my military guys wanted to get me into a command center, basically where nuclear war would be fought from the East Coast. And very few people, senators don't go into this place. And it's, the place that has the Marines that are stationed that, if something happens and anyone without zebra stripes on their badge, they have 60 seconds to get out, and then they shoot everyone who's in there. It doesn't matter if you're the President of the United States. That's true, by the way, if you don't have a zebra. So anyway, I'm going into this place, and of course, I have never worked for the government, never been in the military, never anything. But I wanted to go there to do some things and investigate some things that were important to what we're doing. And so we go in, and my military escort, I'm there in a nice suit and stuff, and we go in, and he's acknowledged, and finally we get to the inner sanctum, and it's like Star Wars, these huge screens where the whole world is, and everything's being tracked, and this one man comes up and says, "Who is this? Well, why is he here?" And I went into a state of consciousness where he just would be okay. I do this. That's how I got into NORAD too, by the way. And I just went into the state of consciousness like that. And my military guy said, well, this is Dr. Greer, and you don't have a need to know why he's here. So you can use that. You see, so we just then had all access pass. And I'm not kidding. This is a true story. So I know, quite eccentric. Anyway, they didn't shoot me. So this state of consciousness is extremely effective because also a lot of the top secret military people that I have met, I've drawn to the project. I go into a state of meditation. I'll be in a city. I'll be in Sacramento or wherever. And I'll be in my meditation, and I'll go into this state, and I will ask, and then I will see a person, absolutely, like I'm seeing you. And I'll say, okay, so I'll go to some place to have a drink and ask that that person show up. And sure enough, on this thing next to me will be the guy. And I won't say anything to him. He'll look at me and say, hey, what are you doing in town? I would say, oh, you probably don't want to know. And then he'll say, oh, well, you... And I'll tell him, he'll say, well, really? Well, I'm a vice president of SAIC. Or I work for E-Systems. And you're absolutely right. And so that's how I pull this stuff in. Very frustrating to the military guys that, you know. Yeah. It's how it's done. So, other questions from folks? Yes, sir.
I thought about what you said yesterday, quite a bit about who the powers that be, basically. And I was just wondering if you could touch on sort of Richard Branson and maybe what he might have to do with a positive or negative activity with space, because supposedly he's obviously got the affluence to make decisions on both sides, and I'm just curious as to if you know anything.
I have not spoken with him. Someone who's on our team, who's a military guy, has. He appears to be rather supportive, but we have not had a tete-a-tete, and I don't know his level of clearance in these projects or any at all, if he just has an interest. And just because you're a billionaire doesn't mean that you're read into this stuff. Just because you're president doesn't mean you're read into it. So that's all I know. I think he is genuinely concerned about global warming. I think he's genuinely concerned about the deterioration of the biosphere. I know he's interested in these matters for a fact, but that's all I can say. Beyond that, I
just donated $2 billion, I believe.
That's why I'm bringing
to
it up.
UC Berkeley to develop alternate energy sources. That was in a paper the other day, right?
And well, he's also developing some sort of. He wants to do some like for the community to go out into space. He's trying to develop, and I'm sure that when it comes down to it, as soon as he confronted the government, I mean, there's obviously all these things that are known in the government that would create some, you know.
Right.
It's obviously different than he knows. If he's trying to create some sort of e-ticket ride to the moon and back for the very affluent, there's other things that come into play, obviously, with that.
Perhaps not. I mean, there are a lot of private space endeavors going on, and you know, including this Bigelow and folks like that. And many of them are tied into the super secret programs, and some aren't. As for Branson, since I really don't know more than I said about that situation, but it would be useful if he put some of this funding in the hands of people who could actually develop something useful, which is not likely to happen from a university setting.
You don't think that UC Berkeley has the facilities to...
Oh, are you kidding? Lawrence Berkeley Labs have had these super secret. In fact, one of the people I'm working with had a resonance frequency solid state crystalline device that was over unity, free energy, and was there at Lawrence Berkeley Labs. And as soon as he hit the sweet spot in the correct resonance frequency, bam, in came all these people, and he was actually dragged off, injected with Thorazine, and thrown into a mental institution. I'm not kidding. So, yes, so that's why I'm rather skeptical. Well, I believe it when I see it. I think that these large institutions, including there's the whole military industrial laboratory university complex, and it does involve certain key universities that run. For example, University of California runs Los Alamos Labs, has the contract to run that. So there's a lot of that connection, and so it's not necessarily helpful. But I remain open to the
Learn
possibility.
a little history there to understand what the connection between size and efficiency happens to have been in history. That would be kind of good to know. I mean, Branson is an interesting one to bring up, so that would be kind of interesting because he seems to be sort of on the edge of a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Other questions?
Good question. How come it seems like there was relatively maybe simple experiments that, given in the proper laboratory, like if I were to drop off a box to a scientist in the middle of Chile or the middle of China or the middle of Israel, and they said, look, follow these instructions, you get this result, and then this, and I'm going to make 50,000 of these boxes or packages or things. It seems like that something like that created would disrupt the academic or the classical or the contemporary model for linear time and our relationship, and it would disrupt enough of the things that hold together what's going on as far as our relationship to energy, our relationship to information, or how we...
You're talking about getting one of these new energy devices in the hands of a lot of people, basically what you're saying. Yeah, but you have to get it.
Or just something that...
It's not that simple. I mean, you're not building a toaster. I mean, it is a very, very arcane bit of knowledge, and not as easy as people make it sound. But yes, if you did get to the point where you had something that was what Dr. Bearden and I call the robust demonstrator, which means a kilowatt or greater of over-unity energy that's power, not energy. Now, you know the difference between power and energy. Energy is everywhere. You have to rectify energy to create usable power. Power is wattage times current, okay, to get the actual, is the voltage times current to get the wattage, and the wattage is the power. I mean, you can have all the free energy you want, but if you can't rectify it to run these lights, you ain't got anything practical value. And that is the difference. A lot of people say, I have a free energy device. Yes, but does it actually generate a net amount of exportable, usable power? These are two different things. So, but yes, I agree with you. Our plan at SEAS, the Space Energy Access System, so where we've developed this strategy, is to, if we identify someone or the funding to get these things built into a robust, and there are prototypes out there, but they're not at this level yet, then we would get it tested at key facilities that we have friendly, honest scientists who are prestigious, including a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, who would then put their imprimatur on this and say, yes, this is doing this. It is a closed system. It's using exportable power. Even if they don't understand where the energy is coming from, they may not understand what the quantum vacuum flux field or zero-point energy field is. Then we would have a whole lot of them made and put into the hands of key people and have a major press conference very quickly. Because one of the problems that a lot of these inventors have done, they think that they're going to do this in some stealth fashion, or the people who are usually the inventors and engineers really are not good with the strategic part of this. Now, I, on the other hand, couldn't engineer a toaster, but I'm very good at strategic leadership, and so that's what our team would do. We'd do the strategic leadership to get this out, and we would do it. Now, of course, that has to do with how far you're willing to go given a matrix of threat or inducements to buy out, sell out. And that's why we would not allow, if someone offered me $100 billion right now for 51% interest in this endeavor, I'd say absolutely not. Because the money people and the legal and business people almost never are going to stand down a Section 181 order, you know, the Title 35 of the patent law that allows for a national security seizure, or one of these black ops guys threatening your life, or an inducement. You know, I mean, there was one guy who approached me once and said, oh, you know, I can help put in around $5 million in seed money so these things can really get developed that you've discovered. And I'd say, yeah, great. But he wanted, it was like, I call it vulture capital, not venture capital. And he wanted, you know, like 60, 70% interest and to control this. I said, well, I don't care if he had $5 billion, it wouldn't happen. And he was shocked. He said, why not? That's how it works. I said, that's not how this works. I said, well, let me answer your question with a question. You put $5 million into this, and it's not enough, but say $10 million, and we get the team put together, and we have half a dozen of these things beta tested, ready to go, like you're talking about, distributed. Suddenly someone surfaces who offers you, for your $10 million placement, $100 billion. What would you do? He said, oh, I'm a businessman, I'd sell. I said, no, you're a money whore. And there's a difference between a money whore and you've just sold out the future of Earth and a multi-trillion-dollar industry, but more importantly, the future of the Earth and saving the Earth's environment and eliminating the whole way we're living and devouring the biosphere for a few pieces of silver. So anyone who would do such a thing for any amount of money or any level of threat is not a suitable board member in this effort. But here's the problem. Your average inventor, even your exceptional inventor, your exceptional investment team, your exceptional legal team, they will not withstand that threat matrix. And it is a real one. And it has happened dozens of times. And this is why there has to be a firewall in terms of the controlling authority over this operation and those folks. Because they may say that, but when they start having Murder Incorporated coming after them, and I mean with the you know, this and for 100, the proof is we're still running these lights off of coal-fired power plants because this technology has been in some stage of discovery and development for the better part of 100 years, certainly 75 years, that we can prove. And we're still using gasoline, and we're still using coal. And this is a completely, and so if this was so simple to do, it'd been a fait accompli a long time ago.
Yeah, that's why I fundamentally can't understand but that makes sense, the next level.
The next level.
Taking off the next rigor.
And that's why, you know, I mean, I had a conversation with Ted Koppel about this a few years ago. He said, well, if you ever get one of these, he says, boy, you know, of course he's retired now, but he said, boy, it'd be great to have. I said, yeah, but you better have 3 backup satellites to Earthstar 1 or 2 or whatever you're using for your ABC News because they're going to jam it. And that was before we had the whole first hour of the National Press Club event in 01 jammed by NSA or somebody as they were trying to broadcast it out of that building. First time in the history of the National Press Club. In the United States Capitol, jammed the whole first hour of it. There were so many millions of people trying to get online. By the way, they used up every T1 line in D.C. to do this. And so I said, this is a tough nut to crack. So you better have a network built. And that's what I've been doing for the last decade or so, is building this network so that there are millions of people, literally, who follow our work. We get one of these things, and I don't care, you know, how primitive it looks. And it may not be ready to be sold at Ace Hardware store, but it's going to be known. You don't sit on this. And so it's counterintuitive. Most inventors and most technology teams say, we're going to keep this very secret. Oh, no, you don't. No, you know, you just can't because, you know, the secrecy is their game. We own the light and disclosure. They own the darkness of secrecy. And so let them have their little secret. But when you step out, and this is one of these counterintuitive things, because if you do what you're doing very publicly, and this is what we're doing with the CE5 initiative as well. I mean, we report this stuff out, and, you know, lots of people follow this. You've got a 1 billion-watt spotlight shining on you with all these people knowing. Well, they're not going to move into that because these people work in this sort of furtive, dark world. And this is the big mistake so many inventors have done. They have sat on these things too long, and they have been too cute by twice. And what happens is that they're caught in this trap before hundreds of millions of people know about it. And you have to have hundreds of millions of people know about it. You cannot do this thing without the masses, because your first vanguard of protection is the knowledge of the masses, the knowledge of the public. And the public needs to know, but they'll also be your biggest defenders. You know, can you imagine that if you actually had a technology that would free people from electric bills and from pollution and gasoline bills, and it was known by hundreds of millions of people through a satellite broadcast and everything else, with all kinds of strategies we have that I don't want to go into. But if you do that, well, I mean, if there was a covert or overt attempt to suppress that, A, it would be known, B, you'd have a million people march on Washington and burn the city down. It won't happen. So that's why Disclosure Project happened. I mean, we ramped this thing up so that there were millions, 10, 15 million people listening about it on Coast to Coast AM and other, not just that, but other media outlets, that this was going to happen. So